data and cyber enterprise risk. And the title here on the slide, as you see, is From Data to Buy-in, Driving Cybersecurity as a Top Business Priority. I am happy and really pleased to be able to welcome my fellow panelists on this, and I'll be moderating throughout and paying attention to the chat. We have Chris Hetner, Dominique Shelton-Leipzig, and Kumar Dasani. I'm going to do a brief intro of all of them momentarily, and then ask them also to share a little bit about themselves, perhaps that we can get in greater detail. So Dominique is a CEO and board of Privacy Cyber Advisor. She's in the Forbes 50 over 50 2024 list. She's a speaker and an author, very impressive person. We're very lucky to be able to have her here. Chris is a senior executive. He serves over 24,000 member boardroom community. He's a former senior cyber security advisor to the SEC chair, former US Treasury senior cyber advisor, and G7 cyber expert. He's also a board director, CISO in the past, and risk executive as well. Kumar asked me to introduce him as a recovering CISO. He's a cybersecurity leader. He's been a CISO at least 2 times. He's an advisor, he's an investor, and also top global CISO award winner from Cyber Defense Magazine just this year, 2024. Congratulations again. And I'm Sean Costigan. I'm the managing director of Resilient Strategy at Redshift, also a board member and NATO Prize winner and a speaker. So together, we're going to have a really fascinating conversation. And so I'm going to turn it over just very briefly to everybody to get a little bit more detail before we go into it. Dominique, if I can go to you first and just tell us something you'd like to about yourself and about the work that you're doing briefly, and then we'll go around and get into the questions. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Sean, for having this discussion and having me here. As you mentioned, I started my company. It actually launched on November 1st. Chris is a part of my community of experts that I bring into engagements, but the focus of global data innovation is to get at the blind spot. I spent 33 years prior to starting the company in big law and working with hundreds of companies. And I've yet to meet one that didn't have a blind spot, a pretty significant one, associated with their data management leadership as it relates to cyber. And that's not because people aren't working hard. It's not because there aren't amazing CISOs out there, amazing data management leaders, amazing CEOs and board members. It's almost like we have too many jobs happening for those folks. And that's why I put the company together, to really just be laser focused on bringing visibility to those issues.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And that's, yeah, we're going to get into all of those questions, I think, and hopefully get some practical insights on how we can deal with them as well. So Kumar, I'm going to go over to you. We had a moment of levity. We said you had a panic button in the back of your room there. It looks like it's still there, so we can see it on camera. So recovering CISO needs a panic button. So tell us what you're working on and where you came from. And
yeah, security leaders always need some sort of a panic button or an easy button, right? Whatever you choose. But no, again, thank you. Great to be here. Great to be in this company. Nice to meet you, Dominique. I've heard a lot about you, but nice to meet you in person. Chris, obviously we've connected, and Sean, you and I have known each other for a while. Very important topic, ever evolving industry. There's lots going on. I know the focus and the attention sometimes comes back into this conversation because of incidents or breaches or what's happening today, what's the hot topic or the hot breach. But I think for me, I've learned a lot over the years through different industries, through different disciplines. Have been fortunate enough to work in different verticals as well. And really, for me, I always point back to the basics and the foundations. Let's just start there. Then the compliance aspects and some of the other pieces will take care of itself on top of that. But foundational bus, foundation process and controls will get you a long way and help you reduce the attack surface. And it's worked for me in the past, and our teams and the companies and the environments that I've worked in. So let's just kind of focus on that. And then, yes, there are some nuances across the board, and we'll discuss more on those as well.
Never neglect the basics.
Appreciate the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kumar. So, Chris, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, and what an honor to be amongst such esteemed guests and panelists. As mentioned, Dominique and I collaborate together on driving cyber risk governance and insights and oversight across the boardroom community. This is very much a C-level issue, including the CISO, the CEO, CFO, enterprise risk management team, and the board of directors. I am also a recovering CISO. When there was a platform called GE Capital where we had roughly $500 billion in assets across 60 countries, 120,000 employees, and we were a SIFI designated financial institution as a result of Dodd-Frank. So I was cobbled together about 125 distinct cybersecurity programs across the globe into a unified framework. I always joke that's why I lost all of my hair. Been in the space for about 3 decades, early days in the 90s, building and operating data centers and security operations centers for financial services firms here in the Wall Street, New York's tri-state area, and worked in Wall Street at Citigroup, GE Capital. We talked about my work with the SEC as senior advisor, and now I'm largely working with leaders such as Dominique and the boardroom community on elevating cyber risk oversight across the community, as well as the senior cyber risk advisor to the NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors, where I serve a portfolio of about 24,000 board members. So looking forward to the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, there's quite a bit of wealth in this room. So let's start with one of the easy ones, because they're all easy, right? We've been talking about these questions for so long where we can make them sound easy, but the solutions are not as easy as the discussion. But let's go into it a little bit and think about what CISOs and cybersecurity leaders can help identify, and how can they prioritize their most critical cyber risks to ensure that cybersecurity spend aligns with business objectives. And the reason that I'm asking that is that we're all familiar with this problem of misalignment, both between the risks that are being felt by the organizations themselves and what the spend might be. We've been in many different meetings where we've heard people say we need more money. How that money is associated with the actual risks is not always clear. So what do we do here? What are the best practices that you can give for CISOs and others in the C-suite to be able to align their spend with their risk? Who'd like to start?
I could take a swing at this. So,
I can just start really quick, right? And
okay. Yeah.
Go ahead, Kumar.
Go.
Oh, I was just going to say, just aligning business risks, right, and understanding what does it mean for the business, right? Both enabling them, and oftentimes we've heard crown jewels, right, and focusing on crown jewels. However, the complexity of the business, the enterprise, the systems has grown so much that I think I disagree with that a little bit. Just focusing on crown jewels, yes, you can certainly start there and prioritize, but as we have seen and heard and experienced with different industries, sometimes what gets you into trouble is what you don't see or what you don't prioritize and what's not part of your crown jewels. So I think it has to be a holistic approach. That doesn't mean that you have to solve for everything overnight or everything at once, but you just still have to understand the entirety of the business, the services, who the customers are, what's at stake, and what can you do to resolve some of the biggest threat factors, right? So that's how I would start with it. I think there are definitely different thought leadership processes out there, so you just have to sort of figure out and balance and right size the approach. So I'll start there, but I'm sure there are different perspectives on how to align with the business and align with all the stakeholders and the leadership.
Thanks, Kumar. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, no, great insights, Kumar. And this is definitely not a static issue. This is an issue that continuously evolves. The creation of data is part of our business. It's part of the fabric of the enterprise. We can't discount the introduction of artificial intelligence, advanced computing power using the cloud, and the prevalence of these platforms that house our sensitive data, where we're reliant on these platforms for a critical business process, including our supply chain. So absolutely, it needs to be a holistic approach. It needs to be a continuous risk analysis approach. One approach that we've taken for our NACD members, and we're aligned very closely with Dominique's practice as well, is this approach where we identify the business profile of the entity. So each company is going to look different. Big Pharma is going to look different compared to a regional bank. It's going to look different
sector by sector,
sector
right?
by sector, and contextualize that view in terms of revenue, profitability. How many assets do they have? How reliant are they on supply chain? And bring that context to those threats that are most relevant to that particular peer group, because we have visibility into threats that are most prominent based on different industry segments, bringing forward where are the top 5 issues, what are the top 5 losses that are occurring. So if you're a manufacturer and you have a ransomware attack that causes a business interruption, your primary concern is going to be the loss and delay of product launch or the inability to produce product. And so we combine that with risk reducing measures that are most effective for that particular business. So that's an approach that we're taking that we've seen has been very effective.
Dominique, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would just say, ditto to everything that Chris and Kumar already have laid out. It's so important for our CISO community to, excuse me, burst through silos and make sure that they are aligned with enterprise opportunity and enterprise risk. And I think Chris and Kumar talked about this, but it can't be that the cyber spend is independent of what the company's goals are. It has to be synergistic. The second thing, absolutely critical to have an actionable inventory of your assets. It's almost impossible to be able to coordinate with the CFO to find out what data is business critical and what's not if you don't know what you have. And we have seen so over and over again where companies think that they have some things locked down and their flank is wide open. So what we need to do is really have that cross-disciplinary approach. I love to see CISOs also aligning with chief innovation officers and chief technology officers and perhaps sharing budget. You talked about budget, Sean. Look, we are doing a lot of investments right now in AI and other technologies across sectors. Really important for security to be part of that innovation discussion, right? And that there's opportunities there for sharing budget as well. But everything that was said, I just completely agree with.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. No, I think it's really interesting that you bring up, an actionable asset inventory and just understanding your digital estate. I think, too few organizations have that, right, to begin with, and then that's one piece. And at RedSIF, we very often talk about reasonable, proactive cybersecurity measures as well. And so there are a couple different threads that I want to just pull together, knowing your digital estate, right? Knowing what the attackers might be able to see, and then also just taking reasonable, proactive measures well before we get to this more complicated bit. This harkens back to something you said, Kumar, which is really like, are you doing the basics right? Right? Have you done the basics? Do you know what your stuff is? And so, with that in mind, let's flip a little bit to how CISOs might want to be able to talk and communicate about cybersecurity priorities effectively, both with their board and their C-suite, to foster greater understanding. So what are the best practices that you've seen? What do you recommend that CISOs do to be able to make that alignment and also make it possible for them to be able to share knowledge without making it seem like it's overly complicated mathematics or further siloing them? What do you see? Best practices?
I could take a swing at this. So, again, using my platform within the NACD and representing 24,000 board members, we on average have surveyed our membership over the last several years. I would say on average 70 to 72% are still uncomfortable with the level of visibility they have in terms of the cyber threat that impacts their specific company. There's definitely fatigue, particularly within the audit committee, around the spend. So Q1 you asked for 20 million, Q4 you asked for another 20 million. Where is that money being spent?
Post breach, you ask for more money.
Let's ask for more money, and the reality is that the cybersecurity community, which falls on the shoulders of the CISO, is extremely overwhelming. There's roughly 5,000 security vendors at their disposal. It's highly fragmented, and so that just creates a lot of complexity for the CISO. So the way I advise and counsel CISOs with chief risk officers, CFOs, and the board is to identify, those threats that are most relevant to your business and playing out the scenarios by which, whether it's an intellectual property theft or a data loss event or a ransomware event, how bad or wide and big is this event going to be and impact your business in a material way? And then back into that, do we have the right level of defenses and controls to reduce that exposure? Even looking at insurance coverage, do we have the right insurance policy? Some insurance will cover 10 to 15% of the loss. And then the balance is really around, okay, so how much risk are we willing to accept? And
transfer.
How much risk can we transfer? And then how much risk are we going to mitigate using the limited resource to have? And to Dominique's point, it's super critical that those investment dollars are aligned to innovation. It's aligned to growth, because if you're operating in a silo, you're viewed as a threat to the business, and I call it, you're never going to be invited to the table. And that represents a huge gap, because now the CISO is not invited to the table. The business is off 100 miles per hour, advancing an AI project with a cloud provider, and you're always playing catch up. So definitely, you want to build that credibility. You want to show interest in the business, and you want to be viewed as a business enabler.
And getting out of the security as a cost center idea, right? That's the key bit. And so much of our discussion is going to focus on that as we get a little bit deeper. But Dominique, Kumar, any advice for the CISOs who aren't recovering yet in this space?
Yeah, I mean, Chris said it well. A lot of it is on the tail end as well. I think for any security professional, no matter what level you're at, right, you have to do your job in terms of doing the due diligence upfront and doing an informed risk assessment, right? You got to know what you're dealing with. And I have this concept of, you got to clean your house first before I can tell somebody else, right? I've oftentimes found that, let's say, the security teams themselves or their IT counterparts or engineering or development folks, they have their own set of systems, infrastructure, databases, assets, whatever, right? And their house is not clean, but they're going outside of their domains and kind of, sort of dictating or directing others to, hey, you got to clean these vulnerabilities first, and then kind of take it from there. So again, same thing, more in terms of foundational aspects, and then you can have that informed discussion on the risk exposure to what Chris said. What are your top 5 risks, right? Your top 5 risks can't be some of the basics, because you're going to get scolded at. It has to be something that is problematic or a systemic failure, right? We've heard the concept of systemic failure in enterprises. So are you dealing with a systemic failure that needs to be resolved at that enterprise level? You got to engage a lot of people, a lot of disciplines, or is it something that is as simple as a patch or upgrades or basic things that developers are not focusing on in terms of producing secure code, things of that nature, right? So that's kind of how I have processed and worked with my teams in essentially talking about moving the needle, right? Credibility and demonstrating progress. You have to demonstrate progress somehow, somewhere, at some level. And once you start doing that, then the board and your leadership and your stakeholders will start believing in that methodology, whatever methodology you choose to implement to reduce the cyber attack surface. Then they will start believing in it, because then you're demonstrating progress. What does success look like? And then having those conversations. So that's how I've processed that.
Good advice, Dominique.
Yeah, agree with everything that Chris and Kumar just said. And I would just add 2 additional things. The reality is that this is not just a technical issue. This is a question of leadership and organization. Chris and I were talking recently, way back in 2001, when I first became a partner in my very first law firm in 2001, we were reading ISO NIST 853. We knew exactly what organizational and technical things needed to take place and the change that needed to take place to bring resilience way, way, way up for companies and bring the risks way, way, way down. We're seeing these same precepts discussed now with, the SEC cyber rule, New York DFS, and NIS2 and the EU. But the reality is, we knew 23 years ago what needed to be done. We're now at a situation where cybercrime is costing our global economy $9.5 trillion. The reason? Our CEO and board community are lacking the information that we all know so well here on this call. So what is the disconnect? We need to learn how to communicate with our leaders, okay? Our business leaders, our CEOs and board members are not going to be comfortable with the granular conversation at the minutia. We really need to get to the high level. What's the business imperative, why this is important quickly, and then how do we get there in one or two steps and step back? Because if you're coming into a board conversation with the granularity of this many bots that you were able to vanquish and this many malicious IP addresses, but you haven't identified a cogent case that we've got 20%, we're doing testing on 20% of our data, but the 50% that could take down the business and 80% of our revenue in the next 3 days, that still needs this amount of spend. That's a very different conversation for the board to get their arms around and easier to understand than we had, 80% response on our phishing exercise. You see what I'm saying? So we need to change the way that we're talking.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with everything that's been said here. I mean, it strikes me there's awareness at this point on boards. If you look around, in the surveys that you might see or any of your own research, the boards, the C-suite understand at least that cybersecurity ought to be a number one risk. At least for understanding what the operational profile that they may suffer through if they have a cyber breach. However, the bit that strikes me is that this disconnect, as you say, Dominique, is real. Like we still have this problem of people who come from the IT teams or the cybersecurity teams explaining things that seem too granular, as you say, or too mathematical. You get the eyes that glaze over. You have all these sort of issues that come down to it. And then there's also things that I've heard, and you may have as well, the sort of perverse disincentive for understanding things from time to time. So if a board says, hey, you know what, I actually kind of don't want to know about this. It would be better if I didn't touch this issue. So how do we get over the hump that you described, this 20 years of knowledge that we built to the point where we can actually explain things in a way, plain language, data-driven, so that the board understands this as a portion of enterprise risk and then feels comfortable aligning spend or figuring out what that spend should look like. And that seems to be the crux of the matter right now. And I know you all are working on it or have worked on it. So what would you do if you had one thing to do right now to alter that conversation in the positive direction that we all need? Dominique, maybe you first.
Yeah. Look, it has to be, again, this goes down to communication, right? So many of our CEOs are needing to step down after major cyber incidents that occur. Doesn't get talked about so often, but many board members who presided as board members over companies that have over and over again had disastrous data breaches have found themselves objected to by the institutional investors and others when they come up for public company nomination at another company. These are the stories that need to be shared with our leaders, because it's not just the CISOs that are facing criminal prosecution, et cetera. It's the board members themselves that are not getting the opportunities for their second, third, and fourth board after presiding over some of these major incidents. And that's what we have to start talking about and familiarizing ourselves with these stories so that we can share them and create the relevance that this isn't just the CISO's responsibility, it's the entire enterprise that's at risk. Shareholder derivative actions, Chris and I were looking at this the other day, 923 shareholder derivative actions in the past 12 months, and 2/3 of them had to deal with privacy, cyber, or AI incidents.
Startling.
So look, and many of those lawsuits named individual board members specifically. So these are the kinds of conversations that we need to start having, so that it's not just the CISO that is at stake. Drizzly, we've talked about this before. CEO has a 10-year consent decree, whether he stays with the company or not, based on a disastrous data breach involving consumer data. Anywhere he goes in the next 10 years, it's almost like a scarlet letter C. He will have to report to the FTC that he has signed off on a written information security program that's acceptable. These are the types of stories that we need to start sharing with our leaders, so that we can take it out of the abstract and get concrete about leadership.
Chris?
No, complete agreement. And, Dominique and I collaborate very closely with directors and officers, and it is getting real in terms of their personal liability and accountability for not only the tenure within the company that they serve on, but also in the future. And, if I back up and I talk about this to a non-technical executive, it could be a CFO, a CEO, a board member. This is about sound business practice. We are here to preserve value of the company. We're here to preserve capital, because these events can be very costly. Companies are taking hundreds of millions of dollars in write-downs. Some of them are material, some of them are not. And this has long-lasting reputational damage. In some cases, stock price depreciates, but we've seen a return. But at the end of the day, this is about sound risk management practices, no different than how you would manage any other risk across the business. Are we deploying capital effectively to reduce those exposures that are going to introduce material harm to our business? And do we have a continuous monitoring process to adjust? And it's really that simple. I think the problem is the historical view in terms of metrics and reporting has been framework focused, whether it be NIST, ISO, pick the framework. It's been very technically focused. It could be phishing metrics. It could be cyber attack frameworks.
Reinforcing the silo right.
It's operating within the echo chamber. And unfortunately, once it makes its way up to the boardroom, it's not understood and it's lost in context. So that's where we have an opportunity to convert this discussion to more business alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the work that Chris is doing with NACD is so important in this regard, sort of elevating the discussion and being that bridge, so that talking about things like making it easy for boards to understand the metrics, creating reporting that is board appropriate. It's not the same as when you're talking to a group of your CISO and peers, as well as those that are direct reports. And Chris has shepherded through NACD an actual methodology for doing that is approved. And every board member and every CISO should know what that is, so they can take advantage of those tools and bring it into the boardroom with a sort of ready-made credibility.
Yeah. I'm going to pick up another issue there, which is that ready-made, capability and credibility that you mentioned, which is, how do you get CISOs very often will say they're perhaps not as appreciated, right, by the board as they might want to be, right? That the C is silent. That's one of the old jokes, right? That they aren't, in fact, chief. They're not in the C-suite in the same way that everyone else is. And how do you overcome that so that they can feel comfortable, right, and appreciated, and that they're capable? Is that a different skill set? Right, for CISOs that we've seen, that we hired for in the past, or are we looking for a little bit of a change in the profile of the people who would become CISOs? So, what do you see for the future there, and how would you alter that conversation so they're more appreciated as credible partners in the business? Kumar, you're recovering from this, so tell us from your side. I'm going to point to you on that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think again, I think it's earned by demonstrating action and delivering results, right? So I'm okay with that notion or perception or misperception, however you want to look at it, right? Mm-hmm. That CISOs are not chiefs, but everybody is a chief or, accountable in their own way or manner, right? So yes, there's obviously differences in terms of how CIOs, CROs, CFOs are sort of treated or respected, or whatever the word you're looking for, in terms of engagement or listening to them or acting on what they're saying or suggesting, right? But I think it's okay. I think security is, you can't make everybody happy. You can't be friends with everyone. It just comes with the territory. Some of that struggle or challenge or opportunity for improvement just comes with the territory. You have to accept that head on and really just demonstrate by action. And I think, Chris, you used the keyword risk management, right? It's all about managing risk and demonstrating what is at stake, right? And reputation risk and compliance risk. And sometimes the leaders won't necessarily pick on that aspect. So you can then leverage the compliance and the contractual risk as well. A lot of times companies, stakeholders miss on the contractual risk aspect. So obviously industry by industry, right? Healthcare is heavily regulated. Financial services industry is heavily regulated, obviously, but there are some industries that are not directly tied to a regulation per se, or there's no compliance stick that you can wave outright, right? But again, going back to the foundations, if you're addressing some of the basic pieces to the puzzle, then you can leverage that compliance stick. But if the compliance stick is not there, then contractual commitments are a huge key. Even following your own company procedures and policies, you can tie to that, because there's sometimes a lot of violation going on from that perspective. You're not following your own policies and procedures. Forget the contractual commitments, forget the compliance and the regulation, right? You got to start there, adjust them based on the risk assessment, and adjust your policies, procedures, standards. Obviously, there's always room for improvement there. Nobody's perfect. And then you kind of walk through that ladder in terms of that progression, right? And sure enough, you're going to get far ahead and, again, reduce that attack surface. So one thing that I would also say is that, look, CFOs are hired and they're not asked to guarantee profit, right? So why are CISOs asked to guarantee security, right? That mentality and that thought process has to change, right? To your point, Dominique, you said it very well in terms of just stakeholders and being partners with everybody so that you can do it collectively. Security is everybody's job. When you talk about a business priority, why is it that, let's say, for example, I'm just going to pick the finance team and the CFO. The organization, the entire enterprise pretty much follows their policies, procedures, standards, way of doing things. Why can't we approach security, InfoSec, product security, data protection, privacy the same way? Easier said than done, but that's kind of where my head goes, and kind of goes in that direction of what would it take for us to finally, we've come a long way, right? We've made a lot of progress. There's a lot of attention for sure. But what would it now take to cross that another barrier, move up another step in the ladder from that perspective, to not have that struggle and this push and pull, tug of war that that we sort of sometimes see, even with the current focus on this industry.
With the undue expectation of 100% security, which doesn't exist. Right, exactly. So, Chris, I want to get to you now, and I want to talk a little bit about the model that you built to make it easier for the board to understand, or more direct, not necessarily easy. It's not about dumbing down, right? This is more direct about like what sort of data is useful. How do we get to the point where the board then can see that data and say, this is actionable, it makes sense to me, we're willing to work on it. We didn't have to get a degree in cybersecurity in order to understand it. So Chris, I know you've done a lot of work in this space, so can you tell us a little bit about those first steps and what that might look like for CISOs?
Yeah, and totally agree with Kumar for just to kind of put a bow on that discussion. It also it's really about tone from the top, and the CEO setting the culture that we're taking
100%
cybersecurity, information security seriously, and I've seen that as a successful approach. So the approach we've selected for our boardroom community is a similar approach to how the insurance markets price and project cyber risk exposure. It's through an annual loss expectancy analysis, where we factor in data about the company. We look at the specific company vertical that aligns to the NAICS codes. There are 23 codes. And within each of those codes, whether it be healthcare, manufacturing, it could be financial services, insurance, or specific sets of data related to company composition, revenue projections, geographical operations. And then in parallel, we're looking at macroeconomics, we're looking at legal regulatory landscapes, and we're also factoring in cyber threat data. So combining that information into the approach where we project where those most likely losses are going to occur through the lens of the business, and what do you do about it? And where are the top 5 or 10 risk reducing areas in order to deploy capital to buy down or de-risk that business? Where are the most likely losses going to occur? What that loss is going to look like in terms of dollar projection. So if you have a ransomware event and it results in a 48-hour outage where 100% of your systems are down, we can make a projection that this is going to cost X. I'll make up the number, $50 million. If it goes beyond 48 hours, I'd like to joke the proverbial bar bill continues to accumulate, right? And so communicating that in such a way to the CEO, CFO, Chief Risk Officer, the audit committee chair, this is a language that they can respond to and react to. And we position that type of approach in such a way where we enable the CISO to work closely across cross-functional teams. And this is super critical because it shouldn't be done within isolation within the cybersecurity organization or within IT. It's required touch point with the general counsel, the chief risk officer, the CFO, outside counsel, the CEO, and collectively they come to this analysis that here's where the most likely threats are going to occur. Here are the potential losses. Here's what we have in terms of our current capability to de-risk those losses. And let's make some decisions around how much risk can we transfer, how much risk are we willing to accept. And then the balance is, okay, so based on this residual risk exposure, if we have, let's say, I'll make up the number, $100 million earmarked towards cybersecurity risk management, here's where we should be prioritizing those precious dollars. And it's really that simple. And over time, whether it be month to month, quarter over quarter, you're able to communicate to the board either you're increasing your risk because we're adopting some new advanced AI platform that has the potential to cause an outage or potential to introduce some type of algorithmic drift, or we've actually de-risked the business quarter over quarter because we're spending properly, we're discovering our data, we're reducing the amount of data in the cloud. And so there's this concept of pulling levers across the organization to reduce that risk exposure. But it could also go on the opposite direction, right? If we decide to outsource in certain regions throughout the world that have geopolitical tension or maybe where cyber criminal syndicates are operating, there may be a business decision to say, hey, we've got $2 billion upside because we're moving into this region, but we realize that there's potential for cyber criminal activity that could cause loss. And that's a business decision that the CEO needs to make. He might say, hey, we have a $2 billion upside, but we can live with a $200 million loss. So it's that conversation that is driving more effective communication across our community.
It seems to me too that would also build some buffer and some space for the CISOs and their teams to be able to operate more effectively, so that they themselves don't feel the same fatigue and suffer the same sort of ill effects that we've seen across CISOs everywhere, where they have a 2-year shelf life very often in organizations. That's why they become recovering CISOs, and elsewhere where the fatigue is real and the cost on the security team is real. So building that sort of plain language, data-driven model strikes me as a very powerful tool. So Dominique, over to you. Jump in.
Yeah, I was just talking to a board member recently from a major Fortune 500, and she was literally crying out for board reporting that is comprehensible, that they can follow. She loves dashboards so they can see where they are in the continuum and that they're making progress, to your point that Chris made, and also that Kumar was making, being able to demonstrate that progress is happening meeting after meeting brings your board along. I think the other thing is contextualizing it in the financial context is so important, because just kind of getting the CFO involved and getting others to help quantify what kinds of risks that we are taking every day that we make this decision not to do X, Y, or Z. And my experience has been just coming in on the advisory side, legal advisory work for CEOs and board members, when things are contextualized in terms of revenue, operations, or business strategy, people perk up, and there is a greater willingness to pull the trigger on initiatives, to fund initiatives, and again, I think breaking down the silos so that the innovation budget. I was thinking about another major financial institution. Their innovation budget was just recently reported at $10 billion. So some of these spends that we're talking about in terms of security, like getting an accurate and live data inventory together, maybe that's 5 figures, maybe low 6 figures. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the innovation spend. So sort of teaming up, putting security as part of innovation, I think is really a great way to look at this, because you can't really innovate effectively if you're creating additional liability for the company.
It's got me thinking about this other question that's come up a couple of different times in my work, which is that, where does the cybersecurity spend live? Is it in the capital budget or is it in the operating budget? And what would be more effective over time? Are there any opinions as we go around the table? Where should it live? If you're going to recognize that cybersecurity is part of enterprise risk for a longer term, then whatever your annual or shorter term budget might be, it strikes me as maybe we should be rethinking where that money should be coming from to begin with. So any thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, it's really about maintaining operational risk management at the end of the day. To the extent that we continue to run our business, to innovate, to enter into new markets, cybersecurity should be an operational budget as part of operational risk management to enable that business growth, to enable the sustainability of the business. The CapEx, maybe there's an uplift effort or a migration to the cloud, but that's got to quickly shift to some type of operational budget.
Yeah, so it doesn't do this ping-ponging back and forth from nothing to something all the time. So there's continuity in that budget, strikes me. But we're all nodding. I don't know, Kumar, any thoughts on that?
No, I've seen a mix and match. I agree with Chris. I think you essentially have to tie the budget, the financial numbers, back to the conversation of what's being done today, what needs to be done in the future, how are we moving the needle, and if part of it comes from infrastructure or there's a pure security spend for security tools. I've seen it done both ways and a mix and match. So it's okay as long as you're able to achieve the goal. I haven't really been stressed out or so much concerned about, hey, I need my whole budget. No, it's really, okay, I need this project or this specific control or people, process, technology implemented. And as long as you get the support across the board and obviously get your finance counterparts to partner with you and agree on it, and then it can happen for sure.
The key to my mind is what you talked about, Sean, about continuity. What we need to sort of break the habit of thinking of our CEO and board community thinking this is a one and done, a set it and forget it situation. It's a effort, and when is it over? This is now part of handling enterprise opportunity and risk. I think we saw during the COVID years that a company is nothing without its data and its digital infrastructure and its cyber safety, right? And we've seen over and over again companies having major stabilization issues. We saw the Ascension hospitals, 104 hospitals, having to turn away people in the emergency room because their systems were locked out, right? We're seeing water supply in Florida, cyber attacks on that going from what is supposed to be safe, 100 parts per million to 10,000 parts per million. And if that had not been caught in time, poisoning potentially tens of thousands of people. So we have to get serious about this in our mission here. And I think that involves a blunt conversation with the CEO and the board about this is part of our product, it's part of our offering, it's part of our brand, and it's not going away. We're going to be even more dependent on this, especially as we move into AI, which will accelerate the 9.5 trillion I talked to you about this year. Even without AI, it was going to increase by $1 trillion next year. But when you add AI into the mix, the potential for accelerated harm is enormous. And that's why we have to get serious about it, all of us, from a business perspective.
Yeah. I fully agree. I mean, between tech debt, right, and the issues that we see now with the acceleration of AI and the acceleration of present day circumstances is the phrase that I use regularly. But you also get you can get a depressing picture at the same time when it comes down to cybersecurity. If you look at some of the IMF put out these numbers most recently, it said the cost of breaches or the number of breaches, the graph isn't showing a very pretty picture, right? Despite the spend in cybersecurity. So in order to overcome that sort of negative and fatalistic mindset that we might see in the boards and cybersecurity teams and in the C-suite in general, how do we turn that around so that they don't look at those same numbers and say, look, there's almost nothing we can do about this, right? The reality is, right, that we're in a really terrible position relative to cyber criminals. We're doing digital transformation. We see AI. We know that there's an acceleration of present day circumstances underway. Hair on fire. What are we going to do about all of this? So how do we get away from that sort of fatalistic mindset and get back to some of the basics, all the way back to what Kumar mentioned, maybe remove some of the hyperbolic element of it and calm us down so that we get to the point where we say we can eliminate a great deal of this. We can do the risk transfer that Chris mentioned. So Kumar, over to you.
I agree. And I think, again, my advice, I'm by no means an expert, even though somebody called me an expert. I appreciate that. I'm not. And Chris called me esteemed. I'm not. But I would say focus and control what you can do, right? Because there's going to be a lot of noise. And again, not everything is applicable to everybody, right? So again, focus on what you can control. What is it that you can do? I'll give a very concrete example. Believe it or not, organizations still don't block USB on their endpoints, period.
Sure.
Now, you can go to an extreme on that and have that risk conversation. Is it risky or not? And how much is it going to cost us? No, USB blocking is plain and simple a basic control this day and age, period.
Or MFA.
Right? MFA, right? So again, yes, great example. So yes, there are always exceptions. There are group of users, group of assets, some OT environments that need to have access to that USB, but that's an exception basis and risk management, right? But go ahead and block USB right away. And again, some organizations still don't do it. They think it's too hard. They think it's complicated. They think users will complain. Again, you can't make everybody happy. However, you can reduce a huge attack surface by blocking USB and then allowing those specific sets of users that have a valid use case for USB, and that can also be managed and controlled, and your attack surface is very small versus wide open. So that's just an example that I wanted to put out there when I was mentioning earlier about foundations and basics and what can you do today to block it.
Yeah. I mean, if you just look, sorry, Chris, really, let me give this quick example. So the Change Healthcare, right, MFA problem with tech debt, that was a whole, that's what they looked for. That's what the cyber criminals were looking for. They found the machines that didn't have multi-factor authentication, went in from there, and we're looking at $2.5 billion in rising costs, I think, for Change and United. So, Chris, over to you. Yeah.
And sorry, one other thing, since you mentioned that. So again, if there is a risk exception, it might be valid exception today, but you have to evaluate and review your exceptions on a continuous basis because you need to understand, hey, risk today might be different than tomorrow. And I think in that example, that's what happened is that, that risk and non-MFA piece got risk accepted continuously over and over and again, but they didn't really kind of pay attention as to what has changed. So
yeah,
I just wanted to throw that out, that exceptions need to be monitored continuously. Sorry, Chris, didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And those risks and those acceptances continue to evolve and over time. And again, I'll just reinforce the principles and the approaches that we take across our boardroom community. It's articulation of where the overall financial exposures are going to be introduced based on risks and cyber attacks. It's a view of those attacks and those threats that are most likely going to cause business, operational, financial loss. It's insights into the cyber controls most effective in mitigating those losses, aka MFA, or strengthening user awareness training. And then it's insights into the cyber risk transfer insurance, including continuous stress testing on the existing policies using a range of potential cyber incidents. And I really stress the importance of that stress testing approach. In some circles, we call it tabletop exercises, but realizing that these events are inevitable and articulating and expressing to the CEO and the board that these are the potential scenarios that could potentially bring us down as a business, and looking inward, do we have the right resources to mitigate this risk? And on the adverse side, kind of the other side of the coin is looking at our supply chain exposure. And you can't ignore supply chain exposure. Last year's metrics based on overall loss suggested close to 70% of cyber events were introduced by an outside party, by a supplier. And so when we work, particularly Dominique and I work with CEOs and boards, we stress the fact that you can outsource the capability. And in many cases, there's economies of scale to move and shift some of your technology and operational resources to a supplier, but you cannot outsource the risk. And so having that continuous risk management oversight is totally critical.
I would say ditto to everything that was just said. It's so important to look at this long term and really get grounded in the reality that this is our future. We do actually know the tools already on how to bring risk way, way, way down. And it does start with the fundamentals, as Kumar and Chris were talking about, things that many of us have known for decades. But I come back to looking at how new tools are out there to make things that seemed very daunting, less daunting. So things like a dynamic living data inventory that used to be something that would take hours of time interviewing business leaders, and it would be obsolete almost by the time that it started. There are all kinds of companies right now that are deploying agents around even disaggregated networks and infrastructure that is disaggregated because of acquisitions, and also cloud environments, and being able to get a dynamic inventory together that's real time. So we don't have to live in the past. We can start with the accelerated technology that we have today to make that dollar point for getting an actual inventory in place, and an accurate one using technology based on what's actually on your system. And that gives visibility to the CISO, and to have, I think, cogent conversations with the CFO. This is what we have. This is where it is. What impact would this have if we were not able to have access? And if the answer is no impact, well, we know we can spend less time over there. But if it's going to take down our revenue by 80%, if we can't get access to it over a week period, etc., then that's what we need to. Sorry about that. Then we need to make different decisions, and that's what it has to be.
Right. Yeah, having that dynamic inventory with a traffic light protocol or whatever, prioritization that you'd like to be able to see for the risks that are associated with it will make it so much more palatable and straightforward for leaders, for sure, to be able to deal with these issues. So, in the midst of all of that, and we talked about controls, and we're going to talk about it maybe very briefly, and then we'll get to the Q&A. I want to make sure that as we're having this discussion about elevating the CISO, elevating the conversation, making sure that there's plain language and that there's data driven decision making. How do we not lose the critical technical implementation for some of these controls that we've seen? How do we not lose that in the shuffle and make sure that people haven't overlooked things like MFA or USB ports that are open, et cetera, and endpoint devices? So how do we keep that alive? Chris, maybe over to you for this one.
Yeah, one strategy that I've seen work, and I've done some collaboration with Amazon Web Services and other cloud providers over the last decade or so, is the ongoing assumption is that if we move to the cloud, we're going to achieve some economies of scale. We're going to achieve some efficiencies, and we're going to reduce cost. and some other assumptions around we're going to improve our security by default. And the facts are that's not true. And what happens is this false assumption is that shifting to the cloud, as a way of an example, provides you heightened security by default is absolutely not true. And so
magically eliminating risk.
Eliminating risk. And we've seen, at my time at the SEC, we've seen several enforcement matters where broker dealers and investment advisors would upload, troves of data into the cloud associated with individuals, and whistleblowers actually alerted the SEC, the enforcement division, that these repositories had no password security. So when you build your roadmap, again, super critical that security is part of that integration strategy, that security is at the table, that you're embedding security capability into the cloud as a way of an example, whether it's MFA or some type of encryption in motion, encryption at rest. In some cases, it's baked into the pricing, inherent. In other cases, you might have to pay up for that, for those additional security features. In conversations with AWS, for instance, they suggest roughly 70 to 75% of their user base are not optimizing the security tools that they have at their disposal. So having that conversation, reducing this conception that the inherent security is going to be there by default, that's not true. We actually have to enable those features. And in some cases, we're going to have to incorporate that into our budget.
Okay, on that, let me turn to the chat quickly, and we're nearing the end of our time, which has been a great discussion. And let me go through and see if I can paraphrase a couple of these. So the first that I'll try and put to us is really, how do we get the CISO and their team to work more closely with HR, human resources management teams? And the example that is given here is that there's an unfortunate gap there as well, either when it comes to hiring people, right, looking for the right talent, or being able to explain even to those people who would be coming on in other positions that aren't necessarily in the security team, what they might need to do and know about cybersecurity to keep it out in their business operational. So how do you see alignment between those in that space? Anyone? It's for anyone. Tough one.
I was just going to say, this just goes to my point about we just need to literally, excuse my language, bust through silos right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The CISOs should not be operating separately from HR, from the CFO, from the general counsel, from the CEO, from the board. It has to be an integrated approach, because there are some we all have blind spots. I come from a legal background. There are technical things that I may not see. There are, from the CISO's perspective, there are, things from the HR perspective that they may not be trained in or know. But if we work together, we can minimize those blind spots effectively. And that's a big part of the coordination that I do when I'm talking to, CEOs and board members and our clients. It's that this has to happen. They need to make sure, as CEOs and board members, that they are bursting through silos, that they are preventing fiefdoms and silos in their organization about something so critical. Because when the company's a headline, it will be the CEO that will have to step forward and defend the company. And as I mentioned earlier, so many CEOs, when you look at the Target CEO, the Yahoo CEO, so many CEOs have had to step down. And they're the ones ultimately that are accountable when there is a major disaster. So silos.
Break through the silos.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's wherever they are, whether it's HR or elsewhere. So quick round, I'll tell you, there's a lot of really fine commentary and more questions that we can take in the time that we have. We did really well. So quick round robin. Kumar, over to you. Any last minute parting shots that you want to offer?
No, I would just say to that last point, great question. Don't wait to get invited. Insert yourself. You have to insert yourself and just get engaged, get involved, and make everybody part of your journey together. So
that's brilliant. Chris?
Yeah, it's breaking down barriers. It's an appreciation of the company's culture and the strategic direction. Ensure that you have buy-in from the business, that you're a credible partner and you're willing to support that journey.
There you go. On that, that's a very positive note. We like to end on a high note here. There is a way forward. We can do it. And you've given really very good, straightforward, and clear examples of how we can do it. So I appreciate Kumar, Chris, Dominique. Been my pleasure to be able to host us in this conversation, and look forward to next steps in the journey. Take care.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye all.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
Sean.
Thanks, Kumar. Talk to you. Bye.